The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Emergency Veterinary Clinic buzzed overhead as Marcus Reaper Sullivan pushed through the glass doors at 2:47 a.m. His boots thundered against the linoleum floor, leather jacket creaking with each desperate step. In his massive, tattooed arms, he carried something that made the night receptionist do a double take. A golden retriever puppy so small it could fit in his palm. The staff exchanged knowing smirks, another big bad biker gone soft over a stray. They had no idea they were looking at a former Navy SEAL who'd spent 3 tours in Afghanistan, a man who'd walked away from $1 million military contract to ride with the Hells Angels. More importantly, they didn't know this wasn't just any puppy. This was the last living witness to a massacre that had claimed an entire family, and the only thing standing between a corrupt police chief and a life sentence. The puppy had seen everything, and somehow, impossibly, Marcus knew the killers would come for it. What connects a hardened biker to a puppy that could bring down the most powerful man in the city? Marcus approached the reception desk, his steel-grey eyes scanning the empty waiting room. Years of combat training had taught him to catalogue every exit, every potential threat, every shadow that seemed out of place. The puppy whimpered against his chest, its tiny heartbeat fluttering like a trapped bird. "I need a vet, now." His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. The receptionist, a young woman with purple hair and multiple piercings, looked up from her phone. Her initial amusement faded when she saw the blood on his jacket, not his own, but dried crimson that told a story he couldn't share. Not yet. "Sir, you'll need to fill out these forms. The puppy's dying." Marcus's words cut through her routine like a blade. Someone poisoned it. "I don't have time for paperwork." The lie came easily. The puppy wasn't poisoned, but it was dehydrated, traumatized, and had been hiding under a kitchen cabinet for God knew how long while its family's bodies grew cold in the next room. Marcus had found it 3 hours ago after receiving a text message that had changed everything. "They're all dead. Puppy sore. Take him. Trust no one. Sarah." Sarah Chen had been the best investigative journalist in the city before she'd gotten too close to Police Chief Morrison's money laundering operation. Now she was just another victim of a car accident that wasn't an accident at all. But somehow, in her final moments, she'd managed to send Marcus that message. The purple-haired receptionist pressed a button. "Dr. Martinez, emergency case coming back." Marcus followed her down a sterile hallway lined with motivational posters featuring cats hanging from branches. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd survived 3 tours dodging IEDs and Taliban snipers, only to find himself desperate for help in a place decorated with kitten calendars. Dr. Martinez emerged from an exam room, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and surgical scrubs covered in cartoon dogs. She took one look at Marcus, 6'4", 240 pounds of leather and attitude, and then at the tiny ball of fur in his arms. "What happened?" she asked, already reaching for the puppy. "Found him behind a dumpster," Marcus said, carefully transferring the animal to her hands. Another lie, but closer to an emotional truth. He had found something precious in the wreckage of the Chen family home. Not just a puppy, but a purpose he'd been missing since leaving the military. Dr. Martinez examined the puppy with practiced efficiency, checking its eyes, listening to its heart, feeling for injuries. He's severely dehydrated and malnourished, but otherwise healthy, probably only 8 weeks old. You did the right thing bringing him in." Marcus watched her work, his mind racing through the events that had led him here. 3 days ago, he'd been just another Hell's Angel, running legitimate security for the club's businesses and trying to forget the things he'd done in the service of his country. Then Sarah had approached him at a truck stop outside the city, claiming she needed protection from corrupt cops and that his military record made him the only person she could trust. He'd turned her down, said he was done playing hero. Now she was dead, along with her husband and 2 young children. The official story would be a gas leak explosion, just another tragic accident. But Marcus had seen the bullet holes before the house burned. He'd found the puppy in the only room the killers hadn't torched completely. "Can I ask you something?" Dr. Martinez said, interrupting his thoughts. "Why bring him here instead of a regular vet? Emergency clinics cost 3 times as much." It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either. What he really needed was time to figure out his next move, and somewhere safe to stash the only living creature that had witnessed Police Chief Morrison's cleanup crew in action. The puppy opened its eyes, bright brown and surprisingly alert, and looked directly at Marcus. In that moment, he made a decision that would change both their lives forever. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Jake Torino shifted his weight in the plastic chair, careful not to jostle the sleeping puppy against his chest. The waiting room smelled of disinfectant and wet dog, punctuated by the occasional whimper from behind the examination room doors. His leather jacket creaked softly with each breath, the sound oddly comforting in the sterile environment. Across from him, a middle-aged woman clutched a cat carrier, stealing nervous glances at his tattooed knuckles and the serpent's MC patch on his vest. Jake was used to the stares, the way people crossed streets when they saw him coming, the way conversations died when he entered a room. What they couldn't see beneath the skull rings and weathered leather was the MIT engineering degree, or the 3 tours in Afghanistan, or the fact that he'd spent the last 6 months reading everything he could about canine rehabilitation. The puppy stirred, letting out a soft whine that made Jake's chest tighten. He'd found her 2 days ago during what was supposed to be a routine collection run for the club. The target, a small-time meth cook named Danny Reeves, had been 3 weeks late on payments to their protection racket. Jake expected to find either cowering submission or foolish resistance. Instead, he'd discovered something that made his blood run cold. The house reeked of chemicals and neglect. Danny wasn't just cooking, he was gone, probably fled town owing money to half the criminal element in the state. But in the basement, Jake had found the fighting ring, makeshift plywood barriers stained with blood, chains bolted to concrete walls, and cages stacked like coffins. Most were empty, but in the corner, barely visible in the dim light, he'd spotted movement. That look had triggered something primal in Jake, a protective instinct that bypassed every rational thought about club business and street credibility. He'd wrapped her in his jacket and carried her to his Harley, ignoring the confused looks from Tommy Tank Morrison, his riding partner who'd been waiting outside. "Boss ain't gonna like this delay," Tank had warned, watching Jake secure the puppy inside his leather jacket. "Boss can kiss my ass," Jake had replied, firing up the engine. "We'll handle the collection tomorrow." Now, sitting in Dr. Sarah Chen's waiting room, Jake wondered if he'd made a mistake. Not about saving the puppy, that had been instinctive, non-negotiable, but about bringing her here, to this specific clinic. Sarah didn't know who he really was, what his life had become since their paths diverged 12 years ago. To her, he was probably just another stereotype, a criminal playing at compassion. The examination room door opened, and Dr. Martinez emerged with a golden retriever and its elderly owner. "Mr. Torino?" Dr. Martinez called, consulting his clipboard with barely concealed unease. Jake stood slowly, cradling the puppy with practiced gentleness. "Actually, I was hoping to see Dr. Chen. Is she available?" "Dr. Chen is with another patient, but I can—" "I'll wait." Jake's voice carried just enough edge to end the discussion. He settled back into his chair, ignoring the vet's frustrated expression. The puppy opened her eyes, dark and liquid, studying his face with an intensity that seemed to peer straight through to his soul. Jake had seen that same look in the mirror after his 3rd tour, when the line between protector and predator had blurred beyond recognition. Coming home to find his father's empire waiting, the family business that traded in violence and fear, had felt like inevitability rather than choice. But this little creature represented something different. A chance to be the person he'd intended to become before war and family obligation had carved away pieces of his humanity. She needed protection without judgment, care without agenda, the kind of unconditional safety that had become foreign in his world. 20 minutes later, Sarah emerged from the back, her face shifting through surprise, confusion, and something harder to read when she spotted him. She looked exactly as he remembered. Determined jaw, intelligent eyes, the same way of tilting her head when processing unexpected information. "Jake." Her voice was carefully neutral, professional. "It's been a long time. Hey, Sarah." He stood again, the puppy stirring against his chest. "I've got someone here who needs your help." Her gaze dropped to the small bundle in his arms, and Jake watched her entire demeanor transform. The careful distance melted away, replaced by the focused intensity he remembered from their college anatomy classes. She stepped closer, her trained eye already cataloguing injuries and conditions. "What happened to her?" "Fighting ring," Jake said simply. "She was being used as bait." Sarah's expression darkened, her hands already reaching for the puppy. "Let's get her into an exam room, now." The waiting room felt smaller, with Tank's presence filling it. Sarah watched him from behind the reception desk, noting how his massive frame seemed at odds with the gentle way he stroked the puppy's head. The other pet owners had gradually filtered out, leaving them alone except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and distant sounds from the examination rooms. "First time here?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. She would have remembered him. Tank's eyes flicked up to meet hers. They were darker than she'd initially thought, almost black, with flecks of amber that caught the fluorescent light. "Yeah. Heard Dr. Chen was good with difficult cases." "She is. Been practicing for 15 years. Specializes in trauma recovery." Sarah paused, studying his face. "What happened to her?" "The puppy, I mean." The question hung in the air for a moment too long. Tank's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and Sarah caught the subtle shift in his posture, a tensing that suggested this wasn't just a simple rescue story. "Found her in a bad situation," he said finally. "People who shouldn't have animals. Mr. Just Tank." "Tank, then. I'm Dr. Chen. Let's have a look at your friend here." Dr. Chen's expression hardened as she began her examination. "How long has she been like this?" "Don't know exactly. Like I said, I found her." "Found her where?" Dr. Chen's voice carried a new edge. She'd seen enough abuse cases to recognize the signs, and her protective instincts were kicking in. Tank was quiet for several heartbeats, his hands clenched at his sides. When he spoke, his voice was rougher than before. "In a basement on Fulton Street. The kind of place where screaming doesn't matter because nobody's listening." Sarah felt her blood chill. Fulton Street was in the industrial district, mostly abandoned warehouses and empty lots. It wasn't somewhere you just happened to find an abused puppy. "What were you doing there?" Dr. Chen asked, continuing her examination while keeping her tone neutral. Years of practice had taught her that pushing too hard for answers often made people clam up entirely. Tank watched the puppy, who had started to relax under Dr. Chen's gentle touch. "Looking for someone. Did you find them?" In a manner of speaking. The cryptic response sent another chill through Sarah. She found herself studying Tank more carefully. The way he held himself, the subtle scars on his knuckles, the way his eyes constantly swept the room as if cataloguing exits and potential threats. This wasn't just some good Samaritan who'd stumbled across animal abuse. Dr. Chen finished her initial examination and straightened up. "She's malnourished and dehydrated, but nothing that won't heal with proper care. The burns are superficial. They'll leave scars but won't affect her mobility. Whoever did this..." She trailed off, shaking her head. "They won't be doing it again," Tank said quietly. Something in his tone made both women look at him sharply. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. There was finality in those words, a certainty that went beyond hope or wishful thinking. "Tank," Dr. Chen said carefully, "if you witnessed animal abuse, you should report it to the authorities." A bitter smile played at the corners of his mouth. "The authorities and I don't exactly see eye to eye on most things, Doc, but sometimes justice finds its own way." Sarah's phone buzzed with an incoming text, but she ignored it. The tension in the room was palpable, and she had the distinct feeling they were dancing around something much bigger than a simple animal rescue. "She'll need to stay overnight for observation." Dr. Chen said, refocusing on the puppy. 4 fluids, antibiotics, and a proper meal. You can pick her up tomorrow afternoon. Tank nodded, pulling out a roll of cash that made Sarah's eyes widen. He peeled off several hundreds without counting. Whatever she needs. And Doc? He paused at the door. If anyone comes asking about her or about me being here, you never saw either of us. Tank, what kind of trouble are you? But he was already gone, the clinic door chiming softly in his wake. Through the window, Sarah watched him swing onto a massive Harley and disappear into the night, leaving behind only questions and the lingering scent of leather and motor oil. Dr. Chen looked down at the puppy, who had finally fallen asleep on the warm towel. Sarah, I have a feeling we just stepped into something we don't understand. Sarah's phone buzzed again, insistent. This time she looked at it, and her blood ran cold. The puppy's whimpers had quieted to soft snuffles as Marcus cradled the small body against his chest, feeling the rapid heartbeat through his leather jacket. Dr. Sarah Chen worked with practiced efficiency, her hands gentle but sure as she examined the tiny patient under the bright examination lights. Dehydration, minor cuts, but nothing life-threatening, she said, glancing up at Marcus. You found her just in time. Marcus nodded, his throat tight. The relief should have been overwhelming, but instead it only deepened the knot in his stomach. Finding Luna alive was just the beginning. Now came the hard part, keeping her that way long enough to expose the truth about what happened to Jenny. I'd like to keep her overnight for observation, Dr. Chen continued, preparing a small 4-line. Make sure she's stable before... The clinic's front door chimed, and Marcus's blood turned to ice. Through the examination room's glass partition, he could see 2 figures entering the waiting area. Even in civilian clothes, he recognized the swagger, the way they scanned the room like predators marking territory. Vince the Wrench Torino and his lieutenant, Danny Kowalski. Serpents. Is there a back exit? Marcus asked quietly, his hand instinctively moving toward the concealed pistol beneath his jacket. Dr. Chen looked up, alarm creeping into her expression as she followed his gaze. Through the surgery suite, but... Take the dog, Marcus interrupted, scooping Luna from the examination table and pressing her into the veterinarian's surprised arms. If anyone asks, you never saw me. Wait, I don't understand. But Marcus was already moving, slipping through the door that led to the back of the clinic. He could hear voices in the waiting room now, Vince's gravelly tone demanding to speak with whoever was on duty. They were being polite, professional even, but Marcus knew better. The serpents didn't make social calls. He pressed himself against the wall beside the surgery suite door, straining to listen. Through the thin walls, he could make out fragments of conversation. Looking for a friend of ours, Vince was saying. Big guy, rides a Harley, might have brought in a small dog. Dr. Chen's voice, steady but wary. I'm sorry, but patient confidentiality. We're not asking about patients, Doc. Just wondering if you've seen our buddy Marcus around. The casual use of his name sent a chill down Marcus's spine. They weren't just fishing. They knew he'd been here. Someone had been watching, tracking his movements. The question was how long they'd been onto him and whether they knew about his real connection to Jenny Morrison. Marcus eased toward the back exit, his boots silent on the linoleum floor. But as he reached for the door handle, his phone buzzed with an incoming text. The sound seemed deafeningly loud in the quiet corridor. The voices in the front room stopped. Footsteps approached, deliberate and unhurried. Marcus glanced at his phone screen and felt his world tilt. The message was from an unknown number, but the photo attachment made his hands shake. Jenny Morrison, very much alive, sitting in what looked like a warehouse. Her hands were zip-tied behind her back, and there was fear in her eyes, but she was breathing. She was real. Below the photo, a simple message, Pier 47, midnight. Come alone, or the girl joins her puppy in a very different kind of reunion. The examination room door opened, and Danny Kowalski stepped into the corridor, his hand resting casually on the butt of a concealed weapon. Well, well, Marcus Kane as I live and breathe. Marcus pocketed his phone, keeping his movements slow and non-threatening. Danny. Been a while. Not long enough, some might say. Danny's smile was all teeth and no warmth. Vince wants to have a word. I'm sure he does. Marcus weighed his options. The back exit was 15 feet away, but Danny was already positioning himself to block the route. In the front room, he could hear Vince questioning Dr. Chen more aggressively. The thing is, Danny continued, we've been hearing some interesting stories about you lately. Stories about people asking questions they shouldn't be asking, poking around in business that ain't theirs. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you don't. Danny took a step closer. But here's the thing, Marcus. Some questions, once you start asking them, you can't stop. They got a way of leading to answers that nobody wants to hear. The implication hung heavy in the air between them. They knew. Maybe not everything, but enough to be dangerous. Marcus thought about the photo on his phone, about Jenny Morrison tied up in some serpent's warehouse, about the puppy now hidden somewhere in this clinic. Tell Vince I'll be in touch, Marcus said finally. Danny laughed, a sound like grinding metal. Oh, you will be, sooner than you think. The lights went out. The antiseptic smell of the clinic hit Marcus harder than he'd expected, triggering memories he'd buried deep. The last time he'd been in a place like this, Sarah had been lying on a gurney, her small hand growing cold in his. He forced himself to focus on the warm bundle in his arms. This puppy was alive, breathing, depending on him. Dr. Kate Williams emerged from the back room, her blonde hair pulled into a practical ponytail, green scrubs replacing the casual clothes she'd worn earlier. She moved with the confident efficiency of someone who'd seen every kind of animal emergency, but her eyes softened when she saw the puppy. "Let's get him into exam room 2, she said, leading Marcus down a short hallway lined with educational posters about heartworm prevention and vaccination schedules. The normalcy of it all felt surreal given what he'd left behind at the warehouse. Marcus gently placed the puppy on the stainless steel examination table, watching as Dr. Williams began her assessment. Her hands moved with practiced precision, checking the animal's breathing, heart rate, and reflexes. The puppy whimpered softly but didn't struggle. "He's dehydrated and malnourished," she murmured, more to herself than to Marcus. "But his vitals are stable. How long has he been like this?" "Found him this morning," Marcus said, which was technically true. He'd discovered the puppy in a cage in the warehouse, one of several animals that Santos had been using as leverage against pet owners who couldn't pay their debts. The sick bastard had a whole operation going. Kidnap beloved family pets, then demand payment for their safe return. Dr. Williams inserted a small 4 catheter into the puppy's leg with surprising gentleness for such a tiny patient. "We'll get some fluids into him and run some blood work. He's going to need careful monitoring for the next few hours." As she worked, Marcus found himself studying her face. There was something about her focused concentration that reminded him of Sarah when she used to work on her art projects, that same furrowed brow and slight bite of her lower lip. The similarity was both comforting and painful. "You can wait in the lobby if you'd like," Dr. Williams said, starting to hook up the 4-bag. "This might take a while." Marcus shook his head. "I'll stay." He couldn't explain that he needed to keep watch, that Santos had eyes everywhere, and that this puppy might be the key to bringing down an operation that had destroyed countless families. The clinic's bell chimed as another client entered the lobby, followed by muffled conversation between the receptionist and what sounded like an older woman worried about her cat. Normal problems, normal lives. Marcus envied them their innocence. "So," Dr. Williams said as she adjusted the 4-drip, "do you have other pets at home? This little guy's going to need consistent care for the next few weeks." Marcus hesitated. The truth was complicated. He lived alone in a studio apartment above an auto repair shop, spending most of his time either at the garage or gathering intelligence on Santos. A puppy didn't exactly fit into that lifestyle, but he couldn't explain that this animal was evidence in a case that could bring down one of the city's most ruthless criminals. Dr. Williams glanced at him, and Marcus saw something shift in her expression. Maybe it was his tone, or the way he'd avoided answering directly, but her professional demeanor sharpened slightly. "Pets aren't just a responsibility," she said carefully. "They're a commitment. This puppy has already been through trauma. He needs stability, routine, someone who can be there for him." The words hit Marcus harder than she could have known. Stability and routine, luxuries he'd given up 3 years ago when he'd volunteered for this undercover assignment. Every day since Sarah's death had been about the mission, about making Santos pay for what he'd done to innocent people. Personal attachments were liabilities he couldn't afford. "I understand," Marcus said quietly. "He'll be safe with me." Dr. Williams must have heard something in his voice because her expression softened. "I believe you," she said. "But if you need any help, any advice, don't hesitate to call. Sometimes the toughest people need the most support when it comes to caring for something fragile." Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Outside, his phone buzzed with what was probably another message from his handler demanding an update on the Santos investigation. But for now, in this small room filled with the steady beep of monitoring equipment and the quiet breathing of a sleeping puppy, Marcus allowed himself to focus on something other than revenge. For the first time in 3 years, he was protecting something instead of planning to destroy it. The clinic's back door slammed shut behind Marcus as he stepped into the alley, the sound echoing off brick walls like a gunshot. The puppy shifted restlessly in his arms, sensing the tension radiating from his body. 3 black SUVs sat idling at both ends of the narrow passage, their tinted windows reflecting the harsh fluorescent light spilling from the clinic's emergency exit. Marcus had expected this. Viktor Kozlov didn't make idle threats, and the 48 hours he'd been given were nearly up. But seeing the trap laid out so precisely still sent ice through his veins. He counted at least 8 men, maybe more, hidden in the shadows between dumpsters and fire escapes. "Marcus Volkov," a voice called from the center SUV as a window rolled down. "You've been a difficult man to find." The accent was thick, Russian, but not Viktor's. This was Dmitri, Viktor's lieutenant, and the man who'd put 3 bullets in Marcus's father 15 years ago. Marcus had been 17 then, watching from a warehouse loft as his father bled out on concrete that still bore the stains today. "Not hiding," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "Just taking care of some business first." Dmitri emerged from the SUV, flanked by 2 men whose suits couldn't quite conceal the weapons beneath. He was smaller than Marcus remembered, his hair now silver and his face more weathered, but his eyes held the same cold calculation that had haunted Marcus's nightmares. "That little dog is worth quite a lot of money," Dmitri said, taking a step closer. "More than you could spend in 3 lifetimes. "She's just a sick puppy," Marcus said. "Nothing more." Dimitri's laugh was sharp and humorless. "We know Dr. Sarah Mitchell extracted more than just medical information from our little friend. Your father's protégé was always too clever for her own good. Where is the chip?" The mention of Sarah sent rage coursing through Marcus's chest. His father had trusted her, had considered her the daughter he'd never had. Viktor's men had tortured her for 3 days before she died, trying to get her to reveal where she'd hidden the evidence she'd gathered. She never broke. "Sarah died protecting something bigger than all of us," Marcus said. "You think I'm going to dishonor that by handing it over to you?" "I think you're going to be practical," Dmitri replied, signaling to his men. Weapons appeared from holsters and shoulder rigs, a dozen barrels trained on Marcus. Viktor grows impatient. "The chip, and we'll make your death quick." Marcus heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Dr. Emma Chen emerging from the clinic's back door, her face pale but determined. In her hands, she held a small metal cage containing what looked like a sedated puppy, identical to Luna. "Looking for this?" she called out, her voice carrying across the alley. Dimitri's head snapped toward her, confusion flickering across his features. "What game are you playing?" Emma stepped forward, the cage held high. While you were watching the front of the clinic, we were busy in surgery. Amazing what modern veterinary medicine can accomplish. Switched the chips between two identical puppies. Question is, which one has what you're looking for? Marcus felt a surge of admiration for the young vet. They'd planned this contingency during the long hours he'd spent in the clinic, preparing for the moment when Victor's patience ran out. Emma had insisted on staying, on playing her part despite the danger. Both puppies then, Dmitri said, raising his weapon. And both of you. The first shot shattered the silence, but it didn't come from Dmitri's gun. Marcus dove behind a dumpster as chaos erupted in the alley, pulling Luna close to his chest and shielding her with his body. Emma's cage clattered to the ground as she scrambled for cover behind a parked car. Federal agents poured into the alley from concealed positions, their tactical gear and weapons trained on the surprised Russians. Marcus recognized Agent Rebecca Torres leading the charge, her voice cutting through the gunfire as she shouted commands. "Federal agents, drop your weapons." This was the moment Sarah had died for, the culmination of 2 years of careful planning and preparation. The evidence on Luna's chip would finally bring Victor's empire crashing down, but first they all had to survive the next 5 minutes. Marcus clutched the puppy tighter as bullets sparked off metal around him, knowing that everything, Sarah's sacrifice, his father's memory, and his own chance at redemption, hung in the balance of what happened next. The veterinary clinic's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Marcus cradled the sleeping puppy against his leather vest. Dr. Sarah Chen had stepped away to prepare the examination room, leaving him alone with the receptionist, who kept stealing nervous glances at his colors. He understood her wariness. The serpent's reputation preceded them everywhere they went. His phone vibrated against his ribs. The text was brief: "Time's up. Location. Now." Marcus deleted the message and looked down at the puppy. Such a small thing to carry the weight of so many lives. The microchip embedded beneath its skin contained financial records, transaction logs, and witness testimonials that could bring down Detective Raymond Torres and his network of corrupt cops. 3 years of Marcus's undercover work had led to this moment. "Mr. Kane?" Dr. Chen's voice called from the back. "We're ready." He stood, his boots heavy on the linoleum floor. Each step felt like a countdown. Once he handed over the puppy, there would be no going back. The FBI would move within hours, and his carefully constructed identity as a Hell's Angel would crumble. Some of the serpents were good men who'd simply chosen a different path. Others were the kind of criminals who deserved what was coming, but all of them trusted him as a brother. The examination room smelled of antiseptic and rubber gloves. Dr. Chen gestured to the metal table, and Marcus gently placed the puppy on the surface. The animal stirred, opening one sleepy eye before settling back into dreams. "She's malnourished but stable," Dr. Chen said, running her hands along the puppy's ribs. "What's her story?" "Found her in an alley off 7th Street, Marcus replied, the lie coming easily after years of practice. Figured she deserved better than dying alone. Dr. Chen's expression softened. "You did the right thing bringing her in. We'll need to check for a microchip, run some blood work, get her vaccinated." She paused, studying his face. "You know, most people would have just kept walking." Through the room's small window, Marcus spotted a black sedan pulling into the parking lot. His handler, Agent Lisa Morrison, sat behind the wheel. She'd been tracking his location through his phone, waiting for confirmation that he'd delivered the package. The puppy represented 18 months of Elena Rodriguez's life, the young prosecutor who'd been murdered for getting too close to Torres's operation. She'd died protecting this evidence, trusting that someone would finish what she'd started. "Doctor," Marcus said carefully, "when you scan for that microchip, you might find something unusual." Dr. Chen looked up from her examination. "Unusual how?" "The chip contains more than just identification." He met her eyes, seeing confusion bloom there. "There's encrypted data on it, financial records, evidence of police corruption that goes all the way to the precinct captain." The room fell silent except for the puppy's soft breathing. Dr. Chen's hand stilled on the animal's fur. "I don't understand," she said slowly. "Are you saying this puppy is carrying evidence of a crime?" Elena Rodriguez, the prosecutor who was killed 3 weeks ago. She was investigating dirty cops taking money from drug dealers. She discovered that Detective Torres and 5 other officers were protecting shipments, destroying evidence, even eliminating witnesses. Marcus pulled out a burner phone and placed it on the examination table. "That phone has Agent Morrison's number. She's FBI. She's waiting outside." Dr. Chen stepped back from the table, her face pale. "Who are you?" "Someone who's been living a lie for 3 years. He touched the serpent's patch on his vest. Elena couldn't trust anyone in the police department, so she reached out to federal agents. They needed someone inside the criminal network to gather evidence. The Hells Angels had connections to the drug trade Torres was protecting. The puppy whimpered, sensing the tension in the room. Dr. Chen absently stroked its head while processing Marcus's words. "You're undercover FBI?" "Was. This is my last assignment." He looked down at the small animal that had become the key to everything. Elena hid the evidence in places Torres would never think to look. A stray dog, a veterinary clinic. She knew that eventually someone with a conscience would bring the puppy in for help. Outside, Agent Morrison was speaking into her radio. Other vehicles were arriving, unmarked cars filled with federal agents preparing to execute warrants across the city. By sunset, Detective Torres and his crew would be in custody. The serpents would scatter, and Marcus would disappear into witness protection. He headed for the door, leaving behind the puppy, the phone, and 3 years of carefully constructed lies. Agent Morrison was waiting. The veterinary clinic's back door slammed shut behind Marcus as he stepped into the alley, the puppy tucked securely inside his leather jacket. The cool night air hit his face, a stark contrast to the suffocating tension he'd left behind. Dr. Sarah Chen had asked too many questions, her suspicious glances cutting through his carefully constructed facade like a scalpel through flesh. He couldn't blame her. A Hell's Angel walking into a vet clinic at closing time with a story about finding a stray puppy. It sounded like the setup to a bad joke or worse, a cover story. Which, in many ways, it was. Marcus fired up his Harley, the engine's rumble echoing off the narrow alley walls. The puppy stirred against his chest, its tiny heartbeat rapid but steady. At least the little guy was responding well to the antibiotics. That was one small victory in what felt like an increasingly impossible situation. His phone buzzed against his hip. Marcus pulled it out, recognizing the number immediately. "Tommy the Snake Castellano." His blood ran cold. "Yeah? Heard you made a little detour tonight, brother." Tommy's voice carried that deceptively casual tone that usually preceded violence. "Clinic visit. That's touching, really. Didn't know you were into charity work." Marcus gripped the phone tighter. Someone had been watching him, just taking care of some business. "See, that's where we got a problem. Your business is supposed to be club business. And last I checked, playing veterinarian wasn't on the agenda." A pause. "You got something you want to share with your brothers?" The puppy whimpered softly, and Marcus adjusted his jacket to muffle the sound. "Nothing that concerns the club." "Everything concerns the club, Marcus. You know that, especially when it involves little packages that need special care." The threat was crystal clear now. Tommy knew about the evidence hidden in the puppy's collar, or at least suspected something. "I'll be at the clubhouse in 20, Marcus said, ending the call before Tommy could respond. He sat in the darkness for a moment, weighing his options. The smart play would be to disappear, take the puppy, the evidence, and run, but that would mean abandoning his sister Katie to Tommy's mercy, and mercy wasn't exactly the man's strong suit. Katie had gotten in too deep with the wrong people, witnessed something she shouldn't have, and now both their lives hung in the balance. The puppy shifted again, and Marcus felt the small weight of the modified collar beneath its fur. Inside that collar was a micro-SD card containing enough evidence to bring down half of Tommy's operation, drug routes, money laundering schemes, and most importantly, footage of Tommy executing a rival dealer in cold blood. Katie had been at the wrong place at the wrong time. saw the whole thing, and somehow managed to grab the security footage before fleeing. Marcus revved the engine and pulled out of the alley. The streets blurred past as he navigated toward the clubhouse, his mind racing through scenarios. Tommy was smart, paranoid, and utterly ruthless. He'd already connected Marcus to tonight's clinic visit, which meant time was running out. The Iron Serpent's clubhouse loomed ahead, a converted warehouse on the industrial side of town. Motorcycles lined the front like metal sentinels, and the windows glowed with harsh fluorescent light. Marcus parked his bike and took a deep breath, feeling the puppy's warmth against his chest. Inside, the usual crowd was gathered. Leather-clad bikers drinking beer and playing pool, the air thick with cigarette smoke and testosterone. But Marcus noticed the subtle changes, the way conversation stopped when he entered, how eyes tracked his movement, the positioning of Tommy's lieutenants near the exits. Tommy sat at his usual table in the back corner, a beer untouched in front of him, his cold blue eyes fixed on Marcus as he approached. "There's our wandering brother," Tommy said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "Take a seat." Marcus sat across from Tommy, acutely aware of the puppy hidden beneath his jacket. "You wanted to see me." "I want a lot of things, Marcus. World peace, a winning lottery ticket, and honest politicians." Tommy leaned forward. "But right now, I want to know what you're really up to." "I told you." "You told me bullshit." Tommy's facade cracked slightly, revealing the predator beneath. "See, I know your sister Katie's been missing for 3 days. I know she was working at that warehouse where we had our little disagreement with the Rodriguez crew. And I know you've been asking questions." Marcus kept his expression neutral, but his heart pounded. "Katie can take care of herself." "Can she?" Tommy smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's good to hear. Because if she saw something she shouldn't have, if she took something that doesn't belong to her, well," he shrugged, "that would be very unfortunate for both of you." The puppy stirred against Marcus's chest, and he fought the urge to check on it. Everything depended on the next few minutes. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town felt like a tomb. As Marcus crouched behind a stack of rusted machinery, the puppy pressed against his chest. 3 days had passed since Dr. Sarah Chen had examined the tiny animal and discovered what Marcus already knew. The GPS tracker wasn't the only thing hidden beneath the pup's skin. The microsurgery had taken 2 hours. Sarah's steady hands had extracted not just the tracking device, but a memory chip smaller than a fingernail. Marcus had watched her work in silence, marveling at how someone so slight could possess such precision, such courage. She hadn't asked questions when he'd explained they needed to disappear for a while. She'd simply locked up her clinic and followed him into the night. Now, as headlights swept across the warehouse entrance, Marcus felt the familiar weight of his .45 against his ribs. The Crimson Serpents had found them anyway. Technology was a double-edged blade. The same encryption skills that made him valuable to Viktor Kozlov had taught him exactly how thorough modern surveillance could be. "Stay down," he whispered to Sarah, who huddled behind an overturned desk 20 feet away. The puppy whimpered softly, as if sensing the tension radiating from every shadow. The warehouse door scraped open with a sound like grinding bones. Flashlight beams carved through the darkness, followed by the measured footsteps of at least 4 men. Marcus recognized the gait of the lead figure, Dmitry Kozlov, Viktor's nephew and heir apparent to the Serpent's growing empire. "Marcus Chen," Dmitry's voice echoed off the concrete walls, the name pronounced with deliberate precision. "Yes, we know who you really are. Did you think a leather jacket and some engine grease would hide you forever?" Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the careful construction of his life crumbling like sand. 8 years of building trust within the Hells Angels, 8 years of feeding information to federal agents while playing the role of loyal enforcer, 8 years of watching his real family from a distance, never making contact, never risking their safety by revealing he was still alive. "The puppy was clever," Dmitry continued, his men fanning out through the warehouse. "A perfect delivery system. Walk into any veterinary clinic, and who would suspect? But you always were too sentimental, Marcus. It's what made you such an effective spy, and what makes you such a liability now." The memory chip contained financial records that could dismantle the Crimson Serpent's money laundering operation across 3 states. Marcus had spent months compiling the data, encoding it in layers of encryption that would take law enforcement years to crack, if they knew what they were looking for. But the puppy was supposed to be delivered to Agent Rebecca Morrison at the FBI field office, not to a random veterinary clinic in a moment of manufactured crisis. A flashlight beam swept closer to his hiding spot. Marcus shifted his weight, and the puppy squirmed in response, tiny claws catching on his jacket. The animal had been drugged when they'd implanted the chip, kept sedated during transport. But the drugs were wearing off now, and its natural puppy instincts were returning. "Dr. Chen," Dmitri called out, and Marcus felt his blood freeze. Sarah's real identity was supposed to be buried deeper than his own. "We know you're here too. Your brother has been very helpful in our search." A new figure stepped into the warehouse, hands zip-tied behind his back, face swollen from interrogation. Michael Chen stumbled forward, pushed by another Serpent operative. Marcus bit back a curse as he recognized his younger brother, the brilliant surgeon who'd helped establish Marcus's cover identity, who'd been told his older brother died in a car accident 8 years ago. "Fascinating family resemblance," Dmitri observed. "Though I suppose that runs deeper than genetics, doesn't it? Both of you so committed to your little medical missions, both so willing to help animals and people in need, both so naive about the cost of heroism." Sarah moved slightly behind her cover, and Marcus saw her hand close around a length of metal pipe. Her face was pale but determined, and he realized she understood exactly what was at stake. The puppy in his arms represented more than evidence. It was proof that some innocents could survive, even in the darkest places. "Here's what's going to happen," Dmitri announced. "You're going to come out peacefully, hand over the data you stole, and watch while we demonstrate what happens to federal informants and their accomplices. Then perhaps we'll discuss terms for Dr. Chen's continued breathing." Marcus checked his weapon one final time, calculating angles and distances. 4 armed men, 1 hostage, 2 civilians to protect. The warehouse offered multiple exit routes but no real cover once the shooting started, and somewhere in the distance he could hear the rumble of motorcycles, his brothers from the Hells Angels chapter, riding to backup that might arrive too late or not at all. The puppy looked up at him with trusting eyes, and Marcus made his choice. The veterinary clinic's back office had become an unlikely war room. Marcus spread the photographs across Dr. Chen's desk, while Sarah barricaded the front door and flipped the sign to closed. The images told a horrifying story. Dozens of dogs in cramped cages, some barely alive, others showing signs of systematic abuse that made Marcus's jaw clench with barely contained rage. "These are from Kozlov's compound," Marcus explained, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "The puppy I brought in? She escaped from this hell. Every dog in those pictures is scheduled for the fighting ring within the week." Dr. Chen's hands trembled as she examined the photographs. "Dear God, the infections, the malnutrition, some of these animals won't survive another day in those conditions." Sarah moved closer, studying Marcus with new understanding. "You're not just some good Samaritan biker, are you? This is personal." Marcus pulled off his leather jacket and rolled up his sleeve, revealing a tattoo that made Sarah gasp. The intricate design showed a dog's paw print surrounded by the words K9 Unit, Semper Fi. Below it, a name, Rex. "Marine Corps Military Police," Marcus said quietly. "Rex was my partner for 3 tours, saved my life more times than I can count." His voice caught slightly. "IED got him on our last patrol. I held him while he died. Promised him I'd never let another dog suffer if I could help it." The room fell silent, except for the soft whimpering from the recovery kennel where the puppy slept, still fighting off the effects of her ordeal. "When I got out, I couldn't just sit behind a desk," Marcus continued. "So I went undercover. The Kozlov organization has been on law enforcement's radar for years, but they're smart, careful. Getting close to them required becoming someone they'd trust, a man who looked like he belonged in their world. Dr. Chen set down the photographs, her expression shifting from shock to determination. "What do you need from us?" "The raid happens tomorrow night. But Kozlov's got sources everywhere, cops, city officials, even some federal agents. If word gets out, he'll kill every dog in that compound and disappear." Marcus met their eyes. "I need a legitimate reason to get those animals out before the bust goes down." Sarah's mind raced. "A veterinary emergency response. If we could prove there's a disease outbreak—" "Parvovirus," Dr. Chen interrupted, understanding immediately. "Highly contagious, potentially fatal. The health department would have to order immediate quarantine and removal of all animals." Marcus nodded grimly. "Can you fake the documentation?" "I won't have to fake anything," Dr. Chen said, pointing to one of the photographs. "Look at this dog's symptoms, the bloody diarrhea, the dehydration. That's parvo, and it spreads fast in close quarters. Half those animals probably already have it." The clinic's front door rattled violently, making all three freeze. Through the frosted glass, they could see the silhouette of a large man testing the handle. "Back exit," Sarah whispered, but Marcus shook his head. "Too late. They've probably got it covered." He quickly gathered the photographs. "If this goes bad, you two don't know anything. I'm just another customer who brought in a sick dog." The rattling stopped, replaced by an ominous silence. Marcus moved to the window and peered through the blinds. Two black SUVs sat parked across the street, their occupants barely visible through tinted windows. "Kozlov's men," he muttered. "They're watching, not moving. That means they suspect something but aren't sure what." Dr. Chen's phone buzzed with a text message. She read it and paled. "It's from my assistant. Someone called asking about emergency after 2 hours visits, specifically mentioning the biker with the puppy." The implications hit them all simultaneously. Marcus's cover wasn't just compromised, it was blown wide open. "We have maybe 6 hours before they make their move," Marcus said, his military training taking over. "Dr. Chen, can you get those health department papers filed tonight? The emergency hotline, yes. But Marcus, if they know who you are, then those dogs die, and 3 years of work disappears with them." Marcus checked his concealed weapon, a habit that didn't go unnoticed by Sarah. "I'm not walking away from this. Not from them." Sarah grabbed his arm. "You can't go back there. It's suicide." "Maybe, but if I don't show up, Kozlov will know for certain that I'm a threat. He'll scatter like smoke, take his operation underground for years." Marcus's eyes hardened with resolve. "Those animals have suffered enough. Tomorrow night, one way or another, this ends." Dr. Chen stood up, her decision made. "Then we do this right, all of us." Marcus looked between the two women, who had somehow become his unlikely allies in this desperate gambit. Outside, the SUVs continued their silent vigil, waiting for the next move in a deadly game where the stakes were measured in innocent lives. The warehouse smelled of motor oil and betrayal. Marcus crouched behind a stack of crates, his heart hammering against his ribs as voices echoed through the cavernous space. 3 days had passed since his desperate gambit at the veterinary clinic, and now everything was unraveling faster than he could control. "You sure he's coming?" Tank's gravelly voice carried across the concrete floor. "He'll come," replied a voice that made Marcus's blood freeze. "Deputy Sheriff Coleman. Family loyalty runs deep with these idiots, especially when it comes to protecting kids." Marcus closed his eyes, fighting the wave of nausea that threatened to overwhelm him. The corrupt cop had been feeding information to the serpents all along, orchestrating the entire conflict between the rival clubs. The missing money, the escalating violence, even the threat against Emma. It was all Coleman's design to eliminate both organizations and claim their territories for his own operation. "What about the girl?" Tank asked. "Leverage," Coleman said simply. "Marcus wants to play hero. We give him a hero's ending." Through a gap in the crates, Marcus could see Emma tied to a chair in the center of the warehouse. Even from this distance, he could tell she was trying to be brave, but her small frame trembled with fear. The sight ignited something primal in his chest. the same protective fury that had driven him to take on this impossible mission in the first place. His phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Sarah Chen. "Police won't listen. Coming with backup. Hold on." Marcus quickly typed back, "Stay away. Too dangerous." But even as he sent the message, he knew Sarah wouldn't listen. She'd proven herself more stubborn than any biker he'd ever known, and her determination to protect Emma was absolute. The thought of her walking into this trap made his hands shake. Movement outside. Called one of the serpents from a window. 3 vehicles approaching. Coleman cursed. That's not the plan. Marcus was supposed to come alone. "Maybe he ain't as stupid as you thought," Tank said with an ugly laugh. Marcus's radio crackled to life, a backup channel the Angels used for emergencies. "Reaper, this is Preacher. We're in position." His breath caught. Somehow, his club had tracked him down. Despite everything, despite the lies and deception necessary for his undercover mission, his brothers had come. "I count 12 hostiles inside," came another voice. "Bulldog here. We got eyes on the package." Package, they meant Emma. Relief flooded through Marcus as he realized his club understood the stakes. These weren't just hardened criminals. They were men who understood family, who would risk everything to protect an innocent child. "Federal agents, surround the building," boomed a voice from outside, amplified by a megaphone. Coleman's face went white. This wasn't supposed to happen. The deal was just Marcus, just a simple execution. "Deals change," Tank growled, pulling out a sawed-off shotgun, "especially when cops start promising things they can't deliver." The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Marcus knew he had maybe minutes before the warehouse became a war zone. He keyed his radio. "This is Reaper. I'm going for the package. Cover me." "Negative," came Preacher's voice. "Too exposed. She's just a kid." Marcus transmitted back. "I'm going." He didn't wait for approval. Moving low and fast, Marcus sprinted from cover toward Emma's position. The sound of his boots on concrete echoed through the warehouse, immediately drawing attention. "There!" Tank shouted, swinging his weapon around. Marcus dove behind a concrete pillar as the shotgun boomed, concrete chips exploding around him. Emma screamed, the sound cutting through him like a blade. From outside came the thunder of motorcycles and the sharp crack of gunfire as both sides engaged. "Marcus!" Emma's voice was small but clear. "I knew you'd come." "Stay down, sweetheart," he called back, checking his pistol. "Uncle Marcus is going to get you out of here." Coleman appeared from behind a forklift, service weapon drawn. "You stupid bastard, you've ruined everything. Years of planning gone because you couldn't mind your own business." "That little girl is my business," Marcus replied, stepping into the open with his gun trained on the corrupt deputy. "She's family." "That's where you're wrong," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. "Family isn't about blood. It's about who you choose to protect." The warehouse doors exploded inward as federal agents poured through, their tactical gear gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. In the confusion, Marcus saw his chance. He lunged toward Emma, knife already in hand to cut her restraints. Tank's shotgun roared again, but this time Marcus was ready. The warehouse smelled of oil and rust, punctuated by the acrid tang of fear. Marcus counted 7 men spread throughout the cavernous space, their leather cuts gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. At the center of it all sat Tommy the Tank Morrison, his massive frame dwarfing the metal chair beneath him. The stolen puppy trembled in a cage at his feet. "Took you long enough, Marcus," Tommy's voice echoed off the concrete walls. "Thought maybe you'd gotten soft, playing house with those veterinarians." Marcus stepped forward, his hands visible and empty. Behind him, he could hear the subtle shuffle of Doc Harrison's boots on the gravel outside. The old man had insisted on coming, despite Marcus's protests. "Stubborn fool's going to get himself killed." "I'm here now," Marcus said, his voice steady. "Let's finish this." Tommy laughed, a sound like grinding gears. "Oh, we're just getting started. See, I've been thinking about your little rebellion, about how you cost me that shipment, about how you made me look weak in front of the other charters." The puppy whimpered, and Marcus felt something twist in his chest. 3 weeks ago, that sound would have meant nothing to him. Now it felt like a knife blade sliding between his ribs. "The dog's got nothing to do with this," Marcus said. "This is between you and me." "Everything's got something to do with everything," Tommy replied, standing slowly. His hand moved to the pistol tucked into his waistband. "That's what you never understood. Every action, every choice, it all ripples out. You save some kids from our operation, and suddenly everyone thinks they can stand up to us." Marcus's mind raced, calculating angles and distances. 7 men, probably all armed. The nearest cover was a stack of shipping crates 20 feet to his left, too far. The exit behind him might as well have been on the moon. "Those kids deserved better," Marcus said, buying time. "They were innocents." "Innocents?" Tommy's face twisted with rage. "There are no innocents, Marcus. There are only predators and prey. I thought I taught you that." "You taught me a lot of things," Marcus admitted, "but some lessons take longer to unlearn than others." The tension in the warehouse stretched taut as a wire. Marcus could feel the other bikers shifting, hands moving toward weapons. In the cage, the puppy had gone silent, as if sensing the violence about to erupt. Then the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a second later, bathing everything in hellish red. In that brief moment of darkness, Marcus moved. He dove left toward the crates as gunfire erupted behind him, muzzle flashes strobing like deadly lightning. "Find him!" Tommy roared, "and get those damn lights back on." Marcus pressed himself against the cold concrete, breathing hard. He could hear boots pounding across the warehouse floor, spreading out to surround his position. His hand found the grip of the pistol tucked against his spine, the one Doc Harrison had pressed into his hands before they'd entered. A shadow appeared around the edge of the crates. Marcus didn't hesitate. The man dropped with a grunt, his weapon clattering across the floor. "He's by the east wall!" someone shouted. More gunfire, chips of concrete raining down around Marcus's head. He rolled deeper into the maze of storage containers, using the chaos to mask his movement. 6 left, plus Tommy. The warehouse's main lights flickered back to life, destroying his cover. Marcus found himself exposed in a narrow corridor between towering stacks of merchandise. A biker appeared at the far end, rifle raised. Marcus was faster. The man spun and fell, but not before his finger tightened on the trigger. The shot went wide, punching through a container of motor oil. Black liquid began pooling on the concrete. "You always were quick," Tommy's voice called out, closer now. "But you can't run forever. This ends one way and you know it." Marcus checked his ammunition. 3 rounds left, 5 men still hunting him, plus Tommy. The math was getting worse by the second. He thought about Sarah, probably pacing the clinic's waiting room right now, about little Emma, asking when the puppy would come home, about Doc Harrison, who'd risked everything to help a man he barely knew simply because it was the right thing to do. Some things were worth dying for. Marcus stepped out from cover, weapon raised. Tommy stood 30 feet away, the puppy's cage at his feet like some twisted altar. The remaining bikers had formed a loose semicircle, all guns trained on Marcus. "There's my boy," Tommy smiled. "Ready to come home?" "I am home," Marcus said quietly. "I just had to travel a long way to find it." Tommy's smile faltered. "You're choosing them over family?" The warehouse held its breath, waiting for someone to make the first move. The veterinary clinic's back exit led into an alley that Marcus had scouted 3 times in the past week. He knew every dumpster, every fire escape, every potential hiding spot. What he hadn't expected was the black sedan already waiting there. Engine running, windows tinted so dark they looked like mirrors reflecting his own grim expression. Sarah gripped his arm tighter. "That's not one of yours." "No," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the ice forming in his chest. "It's not." The sedan's rear window rolled down with mechanical precision, revealing Tommy Castellano's weathered face. The old man's eyes held the same cold calculation that had kept him alive through 3 decades of territorial wars, but there was something else there now. Disappointment that cut deeper than any threat. "You've been busy, Marcus," Tommy called out, his voice carrying easily across the narrow alley. Real busy. Marcus stepped forward, positioning himself between Sarah and the car. This doesn't concern her, Tommy. Let her walk. Everything concerns everyone now, Tommy replied, opening the car door and stepping out with the careful movements of a man who'd survived too many ambushes to take any situation lightly. You made sure of that when you decided to play hero. Two more men emerged from the shadows near the dumpsters, Vincent Russo and another soldier Marcus recognized but couldn't name. Both had their hands inside their jackets, ready but not yet committed. Tommy always was careful about escalation. The girls got nothing to do with this, Marcus said again, but Tommy was already shaking his head. The girls got everything to do with this. She's seen too much, knows too much, and now she's seen you. Tommy's gaze shifted to Sarah, studying her with the detached interest of a scientist examining a specimen. Dr. Chen, isn't it? You've built quite a reputation in this neighborhood. People trust you. Sarah's voice came out stronger than Marcus expected. If you're looking for medical attention, you'll need to make an appointment. You know what's funny about loyalty? Tommy continued, beginning to pace with his hands clasped behind his back like a professor delivering a lecture. Everyone talks about it, but nobody really understands what it costs. You think you were being loyal to some higher principle, Marcus. But loyalty isn't about principles. It's about people. Specific people who've bled for you, who've kept you alive when the world wanted you dead. Those kids you were selling were already dead. Tommy cut him off. Maybe not physically, but dead all the same. You know how this city works. You know what happens to strays. All we did was give their last day's purpose. Marcus felt Sarah's sharp intake of breath behind him. Even knowing what Tommy was capable of, hearing it stated so casually was like watching someone tear wings off a butterfly while discussing the weather. That's where you're wrong, Marcus said, his hand moving slowly toward the knife at his belt. Every one of those kids had a choice you took away from them. Choice? Tommy laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think choice is something you get born with? Choice is something you earn, something you take. Those kids never had the strength to take anything. The motorcycle engines were getting closer now, but so were Tommy's reinforcements. Marcus could see movement at both ends of the alley, more shadows that hadn't been there moments before. This was about to become a war zone, and Sarah was trapped right in the middle of it. Last chance, Marcus, Tommy said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Walk away. Tell your leather-clad friends this was all a misunderstanding. Help us clean up the mess you made, and maybe we can all pretend this conversation never happened. Marcus looked back at Sarah, seeing his own reflection in her dark eyes. Fear was there, yes, but also something else. A stubborn determination that reminded him why he'd started this whole thing in the first place. Some people were worth protecting, not because they were strong enough to protect themselves, but because their strength showed up in different ways. Can't do that, Tommy. I was afraid you'd say that. Tommy nodded to his men, and the sound of weapons being drawn echoed off the alley walls like metallic thunder. You always were too stupid to know when you were beaten. The first motorcycle roared into view at the far end of the alley, its headlight cutting through the gathering dusk like a silver blade. Marcus smiled grimly and drew his knife. Maybe, he said, but I was never too stupid to keep fighting. The warehouse district stretched before them like a concrete graveyard, shadows pooling between buildings that had seen better decades. Marcus cut the Harley's engine 2 blocks away, the sudden silence almost deafening after hours of riding. Sarah's arms loosened from around his waist, but she didn't immediately let go. This is it, she whispered, staring at the cluster of vehicles surrounding the corrugated metal building ahead. Black SUVs, a few motorcycles, and Vincent's silver Mercedes gleaming under the single streetlight like a predator's tooth. Marcus felt the weight of the .45 against his ribs, the backup piece strapped to his ankle. 3 days ago, his biggest worry had been whether the clinic had enough flea medication in stock. Now he was preparing to walk into what might be his last gunfight, all because a scared woman had trusted him with a secret that could topple an empire. The loading dock on the east side, Sarah continued, pointing with a trembling finger. There's a service entrance Vincent's people don't usually watch. If we can get inside, we? Marcus turned to face her fully. You're staying with the bike. Before he could argue, the distant sound of engines made them both freeze. 3 motorcycles rounded the corner, moving slow and deliberate. Not Vincent's people. Marcus recognized the riding formation. Club business. Shit! He grabbed Sarah's hand. Move, now! They abandoned the Harley, sprinting toward the maze of abandoned cars and shipping containers that littered the warehouse district. Behind them, engines revved closer. Marcus could hear voices now, shouting orders. Vincent's security team had spotted the incoming bikes. This way. Sarah pulled him toward a gap between 2 containers. There's a storm drain that runs under the building. The sound of gunfire erupted behind them. Rapid pops of pistol fire answered by the deeper bark of rifles. Marcus risked a glance back and saw muzzle flashes strobing in the darkness. The club had arrived in force, and Vincent's people weren't taking chances. They dropped into the storm drain, the concrete tunnel barely tall enough for Marcus to navigate without hunching. The sound of their breathing echoed wetly off the walls, mixing with the distant percussion of the firefight above. "How do you know about this?" Marcus asked as they splashed through ankle-deep water. "I used to help Vincent scout properties for money laundering operations." Sarah's voice carried a note of old shame. "Before I realized what kind of monster I was working for. This place was supposed to house a shell company for moving drug money through fake veterinary supply purchases." The bitter irony wasn't lost on him. Even his profession had been corrupted by Vincent's reach. They emerged through a grate inside the warehouse, climbing into a space that smelled of motor oil and fear. Crates stacked to the ceiling created a labyrinth of hiding spots, but also limited their sightlines. Somewhere in this maze, Vincent was waiting with Sarah's daughter. Marcus drew his pistol, the weight familiar and reassuring. 3 years in the Marines before veterinary school had taught him skills he'd hoped never to use again. Tonight, muscle memory might be the only thing keeping them alive. A child's cry echoed from deeper in the warehouse. Thin, frightened, but alive. Sarah's entire body went rigid beside him. "Emma," she breathed. "Easy." Marcus caught her arm before she could bolt toward the sound. "That's what he wants. Panic gets us all killed." They moved carefully through the maze, using the ongoing firefight outside as cover for their footsteps. The club was keeping Vincent's security busy, but Marcus knew it wouldn't last forever. One way or another, this had to end tonight. They reached a cleared area near the back of the warehouse where Vincent had set up what looked like a mobile command center. Laptops, radio equipment, and stacks of cash covered a series of folding tables, and tied to a chair in the center of it all was a little girl with Sarah's eyes and a stuffed elephant clutched in her bound hands. Vincent stood beside her, perfectly calm despite the chaos outside, a chrome-plated pistol resting casually in his manicured fingers. 2 bodyguards flanked him, their attention split between watching the entrances and monitoring the radios crackling with increasingly desperate status reports. "I was wondering when you'd show up," Vincent called out without turning around. "Dr. Marcus Chen, the veterinarian who thought he could play detective. And my dear Sarah, finally come home." Marcus felt Sarah tense beside him, ready to spring. He held up a hand, mind racing through possibilities. The angle was wrong for a clean shot with Emma so close. The bodyguards had better position and automatic weapons, but Vincent's arrogance might be his weakness. "Let the girl go," Marcus said, stepping into the open with his hands visible but not empty. "This is between adults." Vincent finally turned, smiling with genuine amusement. "Oh, Doctor, you still don't understand what this is really about." The warehouse district felt like a graveyard at 3 in the morning, empty loading docks and shuttered businesses creating perfect shadows for what was about to unfold. Marcus pulled his Harley between 2 abandoned shipping containers, the engine's rumble echoing off concrete walls before dying into silence. His leather jacket creaked as he dismounted, every movement deliberate and controlled. 3 days had passed since Dr. Sarah Chen had agreed to help him. 3 days of careful planning and coordinating with Detective Rodriguez. The puppy, Luna, as Sarah had named her, was safe now, recovering in Sarah's home, while Marcus prepared to finish what Viktor Kozlov had started when he'd ordered that warehouse burned with innocent animals inside. The GPS tracker they'd found embedded in Luna's collar had led them here, to this maze of industrial buildings where Kozlov ran his underground dogfighting operation. But Marcus knew this wasn't just about illegal gambling and animal cruelty. The warehouse fire had been meant to destroy evidence of something much bigger, a money laundering scheme that funneled cash through veterinary clinics and animal shelters across 3 states. Marcus checked his phone. 2 messages waited, one from Rodriguez confirming that backup units were positioned at every exit, and another from an unknown number that made his blood run cold. A photo of Sarah's clinic, taken just hours ago with a simple message, "Come alone, or the pretty vet learns why we don't like people who interfere." His hands clenched into fists. They'd found Sarah despite all his precautions. The game had changed, and now every move carried the weight of her life, along with his own mission. The main building loomed ahead, its windows dark except for a faint glow emanating from the ground floor. Marcus had memorized the layout from city planning records: 2 entrances, emergency exits on the east and west sides, and a freight elevator that connected to the basement where intelligence suggested the real operation took place. As he approached the front entrance, the door swung open before he could reach for the handle. 2 men emerged, both carrying the casual confidence of people who'd never faced real consequences for their actions. The larger one, built like a linebacker gone to fat, gestured toward the building's interior. "Boss is waiting," he said, his accent thick with traces of Eastern Europe. "Hope you brought your manners." Marcus said nothing as they escorted him through a maze of corridors that reeked of disinfectant, barely masking something far worse underneath. The sounds began before they reached the main room, barking, growling, and the ugly cheers of men placing bets on suffering. The space opened into a cavernous area that had once been a legitimate warehouse. Now, it housed a circular pit surrounded by bleachers, filled with spectators who looked like they'd crawled out from under rocks. In the center, 2 dogs circled each other with the mechanical aggression of animals pushed beyond their limits. Viktor Kozlov stood on a raised platform overlooking the scene, his expensive suit incongruous against the industrial setting. When he spotted Marcus, his smile carried all the warmth of a blade between the ribs. "The famous Hell's Angel," Kozlov called out, his voice carrying over the crowd noise. "I was beginning to think you'd lost your nerve." Marcus stepped closer to the platform, ignoring the way conversations died around him as spectators recognized the shift in atmosphere. "I'm here. Let's finish this." Kozlov's laugh was sharp and brief. "Finish? My friend, we're just getting started. You see, when someone burns down my property and costs me a very profitable evening, I take it personally. But when they involve civilian veterinarians in matters that don't concern them," he shrugged, the gesture somehow more threatening than any direct threat. "Sarah Chen has nothing to do with this," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly despite the ongoing fight in the pit below. "Perhaps. But she chose to help you, which makes her part of our little drama now." Kozlov pulled out his phone, showing Marcus a live video feed of Sarah's clinic. Even in the grainy image, Marcus could see figures moving around the building's exterior. "I have associates standing by, waiting for my signal. Whether they simply deliver a message or something more permanent depends entirely on how cooperative you're feeling." The crowd's roar suddenly intensified as one of the dogs in the pit went down. Marcus didn't look. He'd seen enough violence for 10 lifetimes, and his focus remained locked on Kozlov. "What do you want?" "Simple. You're going to help me recover what was lost in that warehouse fire. Financial records, client lists, certain documentation that ensures my business relationships remain private. Your military background suggests you have skills my usual employees lack." Marcus felt the weight of his phone in his pocket, knowing Rodriguez was monitoring their conversation through the wire he wore. The plan had been to gather evidence and testimony that would bring down Kozlov's entire operation. But now, with Sarah's life hanging in the balance, every calculation had changed. The crowd noise faded as he weighed his options, knowing that whatever choice he made in the next few seconds would determine whether anyone walked away from this warehouse alive. The warehouse smelled of rust and decades of neglect, but Marcus knew it was perfect for what they needed to do. He checked his watch, 11:30. The others would arrive soon, and then they'd finally corner Vincent Castellano and end this nightmare that had consumed the last 3 years of his life. Sarah paced near the loading dock, her nervous energy filling the space between them. "You sure he'll come alone?" "He has to," Marcus replied, adjusting the wire taped to his chest. "His reputation depends on it. Men like Castellano can't let challenges go unanswered, especially from someone they consider beneath them." The puppy, now named Hope by Sarah's daughter, had recovered completely from the drugs Castellano's men had used to transport the microchip. The tiny device had contained enough evidence to bring down half of Castellano's operation, but Marcus wanted the man himself. He wanted to look him in the eye when justice finally caught up with him. Detective Rivera emerged from behind a stack of shipping containers, her weapon drawn but lowered. "Backup is positioned outside. The moment things go sideways, we move in." Marcus nodded, though part of him hoped it wouldn't come to that. This was personal now, and he needed Castellano to understand exactly why his world was crumbling around him. The man had taken everything from Marcus: his sister, his nephew, any chance at the normal life he'd once dreamed of having. The sound of an expensive engine echoed through the warehouse as headlights swept across the grimy windows. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, muscle memory from years of dangerous situations kicking in. But this was different. This time, he wasn't the predator stalking prey in the shadows. He was the bait. Car doors slammed shut outside, followed by the measured footsteps of multiple people approaching. Marcus had expected Castellano to bring backup despite their agreement, but he'd counted on the man's arrogance to limit the numbers. Through the partially open door, he could see 3 figures silhouetted against the streetlights. Vincent Castellano entered first, his silver hair perfectly styled even at this late hour, his coat probably worth more than most people's cars. Behind him came 2 enforcers Marcus recognized from surveillance photos: Carlo Benedetti and Frank Torres, both men with reputations for violence that preceded them wherever they went. "Well, well," Castellano said, his voice carrying the slight accent that reminded Marcus why he'd spent so many nights studying this man's background. The infamous Marcus Stone. "I have to admit, I'm impressed. It takes considerable balls to threaten a man in my position." "Your position is about to change dramatically," Marcus replied, stepping into the light so Castellano could see his face clearly. "In about 10 minutes, federal agents are going to arrest everyone in your organization who isn't already dead or running for the Canadian border. This one's different." Marcus pulled out his phone and showed Castellano the screen. "See, while you were focused on recovering your data, I was focused on gathering mine. 3 years of surveillance, financial records, witness testimonies. Your own lieutenant's been feeding me information for 18 months. The color drained from Castellano's face as he processed the implications. His gaze shifted to Carlo, then to Frank, suspicion poisoning the air between them. "Impossible," Castellano whispered. "My people are loyal. Family doesn't betray family." "Funny thing about family," Marcus said, thinking of his sister Angela's face in those final moments before the overdose took her. "Real family doesn't flood neighborhoods with poison. Real family doesn't recruit 12-year-old kids to run drugs. Real family doesn't eliminate people who try to get clean and start over." Recognition finally dawned in Castellano's eyes. "Angela Morrison, that junkie was your sister." The rage that Marcus had kept carefully controlled for 3 years threatened to explode, but he held it in check. He needed Castellano's confession on tape, needed every detail recorded for the federal prosecutors who would finally put this monster away for life. "She wasn't a junkie when your people found her," Marcus said quietly. "She was a nursing student working 2 jobs to support her son, but you needed clean-looking couriers, and Angela needed money for rent." Castellano shrugged, the gesture casual and dismissive. Business is business. I don't keep track of every small-time dealer who can't handle the product. You should have. Marcus stepped closer, ignoring the way both enforcers tensed. Because some people don't forget. Some people spend years planning. Some people infiltrate your organization from the ground up, earning trust, gathering evidence, waiting for the perfect moment to watch everything you built turn to ash. The warehouse suddenly filled with the sound of engines and screeching tires as federal vehicles surrounded the building. Red and blue lights painted the walls in shifting patterns of Judgment Day. Castellano's hand moved toward his jacket, but Marcus was faster. The veterinary clinic had become a fortress of tension, every shadow potentially hiding another of Kozlov's men. Marcus stood at the main window, watching the empty street through a gap in the blinds, while Sarah finished bandaging the puppy's leg. The little animal had finally stopped whimpering, exhausted from the ordeal, but its eyes remained alert and trusting as it looked up at them. "We can't stay here much longer," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Kozlov knows about this place now. He'll send more people." Dr. Rodriguez emerged from the back room, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. "I've got everything we need for the puppy's care. Antibiotics, pain medication, bandages. But Marcus is right. This clinic is compromised." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she secured the last piece of tape. The events of the past hour had stripped away any illusions about the danger they faced. She'd watched Marcus fight like a man possessed, seen the cold calculation in the Russian's eyes before Marcus ended his life. This wasn't some movie drama. People were really trying to kill them. "Where can we go?" she asked, lifting the puppy gently. "If these people are as connected as you say, won't they find us anywhere?" The irony wasn't lost on him. After years of trying to escape that life, he was running back to the Hells Angels for protection. But Tommy's legacy, this innocent creature they'd all risked everything to save, was worth swallowing his pride. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We have the girl's address, her family's address, the doctor's home and clinic locations. Stop running and bring us what we want, or everyone dies." Marcus showed the message to the others, watching their faces pale. Dr. Rodriguez sank into a chair, suddenly looking every one of his 63 years. "My wife," the doctor whispered. "They'll go after Elena." "We call the police," Sarah said firmly. "This has gone too far." Marcus shook his head. "Kozlov owns half the police force in 3 counties. The other half won't move fast enough. By the time they get protection details in place, it'll be too late." He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in 2 years. It rang 3 times before a gruff voice answered. "Well, well, Marcus Kane. Thought you were dead." "Not yet, Reaper. But I might be soon. I need help. You got some balls calling me after what went down. Half the club still wants your head. This isn't about old business. It's about the Russians moving into our territory. Kozlov's people." There was a long pause. Marcus could hear motorcycles in the background, the familiar sounds of the clubhouse. When Reaper spoke again, his tone had changed. "What kind of help?" "Safe house. Protection for 3 civilians. 24 hours, maybe less. What's in it for us?" Marcus looked at the puppy in Sarah's arms, thinking of Tommy's last words, his desperate attempt to save one innocent life. Information on Kozlov's entire operation. Routes, safe houses, distribution networks. Everything. Another pause. "You better not be playing games, Kane. My brother's dead because of these people. I'm not playing anything. Compound. 2 hours. Come alone. I can't do that. The civilians are targets now. It's all of us or nothing." The line went quiet for so long Marcus thought Reaper had hung up. "Finally, you vouch for them. With my life. That's exactly what you're doing. 2 hours." The line went dead. Marcus pocketed his phone and looked at his unlikely companions. A veterinarian who'd risked everything to help a stranger, a vet tech who'd shown more courage than most soldiers he'd known, and a puppy that had somehow become the center of a war. "We need to move. Stay together, stay alert. We'll take the back exit through the storage room." As they gathered their supplies, Sarah caught Marcus's arm. "The way you fought back there, that's not who you really are, is it?" Marcus met her eyes, seeing not judgment but understanding. "It's who I used to be, who I hoped I'd never have to be again. Sometimes we don't get to choose," she said quietly. They slipped out through the clinic's rear entrance into the alley where Marcus's Harley waited alongside Dr. Rodriguez's sedan. The puppy was secured in a small carrier, still weak but stable. As they prepared to leave, Marcus took one last look at the clinic where everything had started. Tommy was gone, but his final act of love, this tiny life they were protecting, would survive. Sometimes that's all anyone could do, save what could be saved and make sure the sacrifice meant something. The engines roared to life, echoing off the alley walls as they disappeared into the night. The sirens had long since faded into the distance, leaving only the quiet hum of the veterinary clinic's air conditioning and the soft whimper of the puppy sleeping in Marcus's massive hands. Dr. Sarah Chen finished cleaning the last of her instruments, stealing glances at the unlikely pair sitting in her waiting room. "She's going to make it," Sarah said softly, approaching them. "The dehydration was severe, but we caught it in time. Another day and—" She let the words hang in the air. Marcus nodded, his weathered face creased with relief. The leather jacket that had once made him look so intimidating now seemed like nothing more than armor protecting a gentle soul. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I mean it. Thank you for everything." The clinic door chimed as Detective Rivera entered, her badge visible but her weapon holstered. She moved carefully, respectfully, understanding that this moment was fragile. "The warehouse is secure," she reported. "We found 17 more dogs, all alive. The puppy mill operation is finished." Marcus's eyes closed briefly. 3 years of undercover work, 3 years of watching innocent animals suffer while he built the trust necessary to bring down the entire network. The Crimson Serpents Motorcycle Club had been a front, their leather and chrome hiding a sophisticated animal trafficking operation that stretched across 4 states. "What about Tommy?" Marcus asked, referring to the club's president who had recruited him years ago, never suspecting that the decorated Army veteran was actually Detective Marcus Stone, working deep cover for the state police. "In custody, along with 12 others. Your testimony will put them away for decades." Rivera's expression softened. "You did good work, Stone, damn good work." Sarah looked between them, pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place. "You're a police officer." "Was," Marcus corrected, looking down at the puppy. "My cover's blown now, career's over, but it was worth it." The tiny golden retriever mix stirred in his hands, opening dark eyes that seemed to hold infinite trust. "Wasn't it, girl?" The past 3 years flashed through his mind like a violent movie. The staged criminal record that got him accepted into the Serpents, the gradual earning of trust through carefully orchestrated acts of loyalty, the nights he'd gone home to his empty apartment and stared at the ceiling, wondering if he was losing himself in the role, the moment 6 months ago when he discovered the true scope of their operation. Not just illegal fighting, but a network of puppy mills supplying dogs to fight trainers across the country. "What will you do now?" Sarah asked, genuine concern in her voice. Marcus shrugged, a gesture that looked strange on his large frame. "Testify, help put them away. After that," he paused, looking around the clinic with its clean walls and gentle atmosphere. "I've got some savings. Always thought I might like to work with animals." Sarah smiled. "Funny you should mention that. I've been looking for someone to help run the rescue program we're starting. Someone who understands what these animals have been through." The puppy yawned, a tiny pink tongue appearing briefly before she settled back into sleep. Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years, hope for a future that didn't involve deception or violence. "There's something else," Rivera said, pulling out a folder. "The department wants to commend you. 3 years undercover, no backup, no support network. What you did was extraordinary." Marcus shook his head. "I don't need commendations. I need to know this meant something." "It did." Rivera's voice was firm. 17 dogs saved from that warehouse alone, dozens more when we shut down their supplier network. And this little one, she gestured to the puppy, she's going to live because you cared enough to blow your cover. I want to adopt her, he said suddenly, if that's possible. Sarah's smile widened. I think that can be arranged. She'll need someone who understands what she's been through, someone patient. Marcus looked down at the puppy, this small creature who had inadvertently become his salvation. What do you think, partner? Ready to start over? The puppy's tail twitched once, a tiny movement that felt like the most important answer he'd ever received. Outside, the city continued its restless motion, but inside the clinic, a new chapter was beginning for both the broken-down cop and the rescued dog who had saved each other. For the first time in 3 years, Marcus Stone smiled without pretending.